More than 6,000 years ago, the land between the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, was nothing but a harsh floodplain. In the rainy season, the rivers swallowed everything. In the dry season, the ground cracked open like burnt clay. No stone, no forests. Only reeds, mud, and people trying desperately to survive. And yet, in this unforgiving place, something miraculous happened. From mud and water, the Sumerians created the first civilization on Earth. No one knows where they came from. Their language was unlike any other known tongue. But when they appeared, they already knew how to build cities, plant crops, make laws, write, and worship the gods. It was not evolution. It was an explosion of intelligence, as if they carried the memory of the universe within them. We call them Sumerians, the people of Sumer, the land between the rivers. They built the first true cities in history: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu. Each city was a small kingdom, complete with a ruler, temples, soldiers, laws, and records. And one more invention that would change humanity forever: writing. The Sumerians were the first to record human thought in symbols. At first, they only drew pictures of sheep, grain, and jars to count the temple's goods. But then someone asked, if we can record things, why not record ideas? And so, writing was born. Cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus. It was the greatest technological leap of all time. From that moment on, memory no longer lived only in the human mind. It lived in clay. Thoughts, laws, prayers, and dreams could outlast those who made them. Uruk, the legendary city of King Gilgamesh, was where human history truly began. By 3500 BCE, Uruk had over 50,000 people, towering walls, grand temples, and paved streets. Here, reason ruled the world. The Sumerians built irrigation canals that stretched for miles. They recorded harvests, taxes, and labor. They invented cylinder seals, the world's first personal signature. If anyone asks, where was the first city in the world? The answer is simple: Uruk, the heart of Sumer. They had no stone to carve, so they molded bricks from mud. No forests, so they built with reeds. No gold, so they forged bronze. From scarcity, they created invention. They invented the wheel that would carry humanity forward. They created the plow, ending the age of hunger. They brewed beer and even had a goddess for it, Ninkasi, the lady of fermentation. When archaeologists unearthed the ancient breweries of Ur, they discovered that the Sumerians had shared beer during harvest festivals, 5,000 years before the Egyptians built their pyramids. While the rest of the world lived by sunrise and sunset, the Sumerians learned to measure time itself. They invented the sexagesimal system, counting by 60. From it came 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, 12 months in a year. Every number on the clock you glance at today, 1, 2, 3, 60, is a whisper from ancient Sumer. They were the first to see that the universe could be measured, that the movement of stars reflected the order of human life. Because when others merely survived, the Sumerians began to think. When others counted on their fingers, they built a mathematical system. When others feared nature, they observed it, recorded it, and understood it. When others told stories by word of mouth, they wrote them down and created history. They stood at the crossroads between beast and man, between instinct and logic, between chaos and order. They were the first humans to look at the sky and ask, why? They vanished as a people, but their mind became the mind of civilization. Before Sumer, humans lived in small tribes, families scattered along riverbanks, each village isolated, each life bound to kin. But on the southern plain of Mesopotamia, something new began. Villages started to merge. People worked not for one family, but for the good of all. They shared water, divided land, and planned harvests together. They began to trust those not of their blood, bound by something greater, a shared idea that order could be created out of chaos. And from that idea, the first city was born. Around 3500 BCE, on the banks of the Euphrates, the city of Uruk rose like a miracle of clay. When other places were still villages, Uruk had already become a world of its own. 9 kilometers of protective walls, a central district of temples and administration, the great Eanna temple complex, dedicated to Inanna, the goddess of love and war. At dusk, the sun would set behind the colossal Ziggurat of Eanna, and its brick terraces would glow red like fire. From miles away, travelers saw a man-made mountain rising from the flat desert, a symbol of something humanity had never seen before. A collective mind. Tens of thousands of hands had built it. Not for one king, but for a shared faith in the power of human order. Life in a Sumerian city ran like a well-tuned machine. Farmers tilled the land under temple supervision. Potters, metalworkers, and weavers supplied the temple warehouses. Merchants traded grain and textiles at the bustling markets. Priests and scribes recorded every transaction, every bag of barley, every sheep, every drop of oil, on clay tablets. For the first time, society ran not on memory or muscle, but on information. Each person was part of a living organism, a city that could think, remember, and plan. Uruk was the first human brain built of clay. At the center of every Sumerian city stood a ziggurat, a massive stepped tower reaching toward the heavens. It was part temple, part observatory, part cosmic ladder. Each tier represented a level of existence: earth, sky, and the realm of the gods. At its summit, only priests could ascend, to meet the gods not through superstition, but through observation, measurement, and understanding. The Sumerians believed, the gods do not hide in the clouds, they live within the laws of the stars. In these temples, they gave birth to astronomy, mathematics, and timekeeping, not to worship the unknown, but to understand it. In Uruk, power was no longer based on lineage or brute force. It rested on organization and intellect. The ruler was called an ensi, the steward of the gods. He was both priest and administrator, responsible for keeping balance between temples, farmers, and trade. Later, as wars between city-states erupted, a new title emerged: Lugal, the Great Man. The Lugal was more than a warrior. He was the embodiment of wisdom and divine favor. From this word Lugal, we derive the roots of the word royal, the very idea of kingship itself. Around 2100 BCE, in the city of Ur, King ur-nammu created the first code of law in human history. Carved in cuneiform on clay tablets, it proclaimed, if a person caused injury, they must compensate in silver. If one deceived another, punishment followed. If a husband divorced his wife, he must still provide for her. If a powerful man oppressed the weak, he would face the gods' wrath. It was not vengeance. It was justice. And for the first time in history, morality had a written form. At the heart of every Sumerian city stood a building called the Aduba, the House of Tablets. It was the world's first school. Inside, children sat cross-legged on the floor, stylus in hand, copying lessons onto clay. They studied reading, writing, math, law, and astronomy. A proverb found on one ancient tablet reads, "But he who knows writing will shine like the stars. He who understands law will walk with the gods." It was the first time in human history that knowledge became a profession, and wisdom a virtue. At dawn, the fields glittered with dew. Farmers led oxen to plow the barley fields. Potters spun their wheels. Weavers wove their cloth. Merchants shouted in the square. Children ran to their schools, while priests climbed the ziggurat to measure the shadow of the sun. By evening, smoke from temple fires curled into the sky, carrying the scent of cedar and wine. It was an ordinary day in Uruk, and yet It was the first ordinary day in the history of mankind. Uruk was not just the first city. It was the first proof that human thought could shape the world. In the stillness of ancient Mesopotamia, the sky was a black ocean of light. No smoke, no cities, no noise. Only the sound of wind and the heartbeat of the earth. Night after night, the Sumerians looked upward. They noticed that the stars moved with purpose. Some rose and set at the same time each year. Others, wandering lights, changed position across the heavens. And in that quiet, persistent observation, they discovered something extraordinary. The sky had rules. For the first time in history, humanity realized that the universe could be measured. Atop their ziggurats, the Sumerian priests did more than pray. They observed, recorded, and measured. Each night, they traced the movements of Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, the brightest lights in the dark sea of stars. They pressed their findings into clay. The time of rising, the path across the sky, the day of disappearance. The result was the world's first astronomical record. The Venus Tablet of Amisaduqa, a document so precise that modern astronomers still marvel at its accuracy. These priests had no telescopes, only eyes, memory, and an unshakable belief that understanding the stars was a way to understand the gods themselves. They were the first scientists, people who sought faith through reason. The Sumerians believed that the divine order could be expressed in numbers, so they created one of the most elegant systems ever conceived, the sexagesimal system, a base 60 mathematics. It was not random. 60 can be divided evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, making it the most flexible system imaginable. From this came 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, 12 months in a year. They did not just invent time, they defined it. Every clock, every compass, every calendar you use today is a descendant of Sumerian thought. They were the first to look at the world and see not chaos, but geometry. In 1922, archaeologists found a small clay tablet in the ruins of the city of Larsa. It was covered in columns of strange numbers. Centuries later, mathematicians realized what it was: a trigonometric table based on what we now call the Pythagorean theorem, written 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. The Sumerians had already solved the relationship between sides of a right triangle, not for art or architecture, but for the sheer joy of understanding. They were not counting sheep. They were counting the universe. The Sumerians divided the cosmos into 3 layers: En, the heavens of the gods; Ki, the earth of mankind; Kur, the dark underworld of shadows. But unlike later cultures, they did not stop at myth. They measured the distance between heaven and earth. They mapped the length of fields, the slope of canals, the rising of the sun. By doing so, they built the first conceptual map of reality. The universe was no longer a miracle. It was a system, a structure that could be known. They divided the year into 12 lunar months. They calculated a lunar cycle as 29.5 days, so precisely that modern science finds their error to be less than a few seconds. They knew that a day could be broken into 24 hours, each hour into 60 minutes, each minute into 60 seconds. Every second of your life still ticks to their rhythm. Every sunrise, every clock, every orbit, all follow the heartbeat first measured by Sumerian hands. Before Sumer, thunder was the anger of gods. After Sumer, thunder became a natural event. Before Sumer, the moon's phases were omens. After Sumer, they were calculations. They did not reject the divine. They redefined it. The gods were no longer beyond comprehension. They were the logic of creation itself. This was the first great leap of human thought, from fear to understanding. The Sumerians never called themselves scientists. They were priests, scribes, farmers, people of faith. Yet in seeking to serve their gods, they built the foundation of science. They did not only believe, they tested. They did not only pray, they recorded. They did not only wonder, they measured. And in that act of quiet curiosity, they changed forever what it meant to know. Knowledge ceased to be a divine gift. It became a human achievement. From those lonely towers of Ur and Uruk, science was born. Their discoveries became the seed for all that followed. Egyptian geometry, Greek astronomy, Western philosophy, every formula, every equation, every satellite that looks to the stars is an echo of the first Sumerians who dared to count the heavens. The Sumerians were the first scientists, the first to look at the stars and realize that the universe was not a miracle, but a pattern. Around 2100 BCE, on the fertile plains of the Euphrates, a Sumerian king stood before a new kind of challenge. He had conquered his enemies. He had built temples and cities. But now he faced a greater task, to bring order to the human heart. His name was ur-nammu, and he would write the first code of law in human history. Before ur-nammu, the world was chaos. Each city had its own rules. The strong ruled the weak. Justice belonged to those who could afford it. The lives of the poor depended on the mood of kings and priests. But the Sumerians had begun to think differently. After centuries of building cities and systems, they understood a truth that still echoes today. If men do not follow law, then even the gods cannot save them from themselves. The code of ur-nammu, inscribed in cuneiform, was not just a set of punishments. It was a declaration of reason and compassion. The tablets said, if a man causes injury, he must pay in silver. If a man lies or deceives, he will be punished accordingly. If a husband divorces his wife, he must still provide for her. If a powerful man harms the weak, his punishment will be greater. It was not vengeance, it was balance, the birth of morality in written form. The Code of Ur-nammu began with a preface, a kind of sacred mission statement. When Ur-nammu was granted kingship by the god Nana, he brought justice to the land, so that the strong might not harm the weak. These simple lines marked one of the greatest moral revolutions in history. They declared that justice was not the will of the gods. It was the duty of mankind. Behind the king stood an unseen council of scribes, priests, and thinkers who debated the meaning of fairness. They asked questions never asked before. What is right? When is killing a crime? And when is it war? Can justice be measured like land or silver? Their discussions, held more than 4,000 years ago, were the first sparks of moral philosophy, centuries before Plato or Aristotle. They did not write in Greek marble. They wrote in Sumerian clay. The Sumerians believed that society could not survive if people only feared the law. They must understand it. So in the Aduba, the house of tablets, their schools, children learned not only to read and write, but to study the laws of their city. One student once wrote on a tablet, "If I know no law, I am a beast. If I know the law but do not live by it, I am a fool." They were not just teaching literacy, they were teaching conscience. In a world that often silenced women, the Sumerians gave them a voice. The Code of Ur-nammu and later texts show that women could own property, run businesses, appear in court, divorce their husbands, and even serve as priestesses and writers. Among them was Enheduanna, the daughter of Sargon, the first named author in human history. She wrote hymns to the goddess Inanna, mixing theology with profound understanding of the human soul. You are light and darkness. You make men tremble. Yet in your fury, you teach them how to love. Through her words, we glimpse the earliest awareness of human duality, the coexistence of good and evil within us all. One tablet tells of a corrupt judge brought to trial. When asked why he wronged an innocent man, he said, "I wanted to prove my loyalty to the king." The court replied, "Justice does not belong to kings. Justice belongs to those who are just." That single line changed history. For the first time, law stood above power. 3,000 years before the concept of rule of law emerged in the West, the Sumerians had already written it in clay. The Sumerians believed every person had two selves, the body, which could sin, the spirit, which could be redeemed. In their prayers, sinners did not beg for mercy, but for understanding. Repentance was not fear, it was self-awareness. From this came one of humanity's deepest ideas, the conscience, the divine voice within every human being. The principles written by ur-nammu became the foundation for every legal system that followed. Hammurabi's code, Roman law, Jewish law, and the moral codes of the modern world. From them, we learn that a power without justice is cruelty. Justice without compassion is meaningless. The Sumerians had no marble to carve philosophy into. They had only wet clay and a reed stylus. But in that clay, they wrote the first lines of the Book of Human Conscience. O you who come after, keep justice straight, for justice is the breath of the gods within man. The Sumerians did not just teach humanity how to count or write. They taught us how to live together without fear. And in every cracked tablet of clay, their first voice of justice still speaks. On the ancient plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians did more than build cities and laws. They looked at the night sky and began to ask questions that echo through eternity. Who created us? Why must we die? Do the gods hear us when we speak? These were not the cries of superstition. They were the first philosophical questions ever asked by humankind. From those questions, religion was born, not as blind faith, but as a quest for understanding. The Sumerians were not just the first believers, they were the first thinkers of faith. Sumerian religion was not chaos, it was structure. Their gods were not whimsical forces of destruction, but reflections of the natural laws they saw around them. An, the god of the sky, symbol of eternity. Kai, the earth goddess, mother of life. Enlil, the god of wind, invisible but all-powerful. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, bringer of understanding. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, embodiment of contradiction. Unlike later civilizations, the Sumerians' gods were flawed, emotional, and human-like. They quarreled, they loved, they made mistakes. Through this, the Sumerians revealed something profound, that the universe was not divided into good and evil, but balanced between the two, just like the human heart. According to Sumerian myth, humans were created by the gods to help maintain the world. Enki and the goddess Ninhursag molded man from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed god, so that humans could work the fields, build the temples, and sustain creation. But over time, humans grew wise. They learned to write, to calculate, to understand. And one day they asked, "Well, if we can think and create as the gods do, why must we still serve them?" That single question marked the dawn of human consciousness. Faith began to transform into philosophy. Sumerian temples were not only places of worship, they were centers of knowledge. The priests who served there were astronomers, doctors, mathematicians, and philosophers. They studied the heavens and the human body alike, believing that both were reflections of the same divine order. In their rituals, they did not merely offer sacrifices. They meditated, chanted, observed, and recorded, seeking to align the rhythm of their hearts with the pulse of the cosmos. One ancient inscription reads, "To hear the heartbeat of the heavens is to hear the voice of the gods." This was the first cosmic philosophy of mankind. No deity embodied the Sumerian mind more than Inanna, the goddess of both love and war, passion and destruction. In the epic The Descent of Inanna, she journeys to the underworld to understand death itself. There she is stripped of her power, killed and hung upon a hook, only to rise again, reborn with wisdom. It is not a tale of faith, it is a metaphor for enlightenment. the idea that one must descend into darkness to find truth. The Sumerians were the first to say, "Only those who face death can truly understand life." The Sumerians believed that every human being had two parts: Namshar, the breath of life; Giddim, the shadow soul, which endures after death. After death, the Giddim descended into Kur, the underworld, a dim, silent realm of dust and memory. There was no heaven, no hell, only existence. To the Sumerians, immortality was not a reward. It was remembrance. To be remembered was to live forever. That is why they wrote, carved, and built, so their names would never vanish. The forgotten are the truly dead. In a text called The Instructions of Shurupak, one of the oldest known moral teachings, a father advises his son, "Do not speak lies, for words are wind that never return. Do not envy, for envy consumes the wise. Help the weak, for the strong today may fall tomorrow." These are not commands of gods. They are the words of men, the earliest philosophy of ethics. Religion had become a way to think, not just to obey. Sumerian myths were not superstition. They were psychological blueprints. Each god represented a human trait: Enlil, reason; Inanna, emotion; Enki, intellect; Ninhursag, compassion. When they told stories of gods battling, loving, and grieving, they were really telling the story of the human psyche. For the first time, myth became self-reflection. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the hero loses his friend Enkidu, he wanders the earth in search of eternal life. He meets Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, who tells him, "Immortality is not for man. The only eternity is what you create." And so Gilgamesh returns home, not with eternal life, but with understanding. The Sumerians had found the first philosophical answer to death: acceptance. To live wisely is to live forever in memory. The Sumerians did not pray to escape fear. They prayed to understand it. They did not believe in order to submit, but to connect human reason to divine order. They were the first people to believe with their minds as well as their hearts. From them, humanity inherited the concept of the soul, the search for cosmic origin, the understanding of moral duality, and the idea that wisdom is the path to salvation. The Sumerians did not simply invent religion. They invented thought itself. They were the first to ask, "Who am I in this universe?" And the first to answer, not with faith alone, but with understanding. The world of the Sumerians was not just war and worship. Behind the walls of Uruk, beneath the echo of temple drums, there were softer sounds, the hum of harps, flutes, and human voices. They were the first people in history to write music. When archaeologists unearthed the royal tombs of Ur, they found harps and lyres of gold and lapis lazuli, their strings long gone but their silence still resonant. Beside them lay musicians buried with honor, proof that to the Sumerians, music had a soul. When modern researchers reconstructed the tuning of those strings, they discovered scales and harmonies astonishingly close to our own. 5 notes, simple, mathematical, perfect. For the Sumerians, music was not entertainment. It was a language between man and God, the language of the gods. In the temples, every ceremony began with sound. Drums beat like thunder. Flutes whispered like wind. The harp flowed like water. The Sumerians believed that each sound carried a pulse of creation. That rhythm was the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. To play music was to align oneself with the divine order. A hymn carved into clay proclaims, "The drum is the heart of the earth. The harp is the breath of the sky." When they sing together, man and God are one. This was not metaphor. It was faith made audible. Among the countless deities of Sumer, one stood for laughter and music. Ninkasi, the goddess of beer and celebration. She embodied the simple truth that joy is sacred. The oldest surviving song on earth is dedicated to her, the hymn to Ninkasi, written over 3,800 years ago. It is both a hymn and a recipe for brewing beer, but its message goes beyond ritual. She, O Ninkasi, who pours sweet joy into our hearts, fill the cup of life, that laughter may rise like grain in the field. Through her, the Sumerians taught that happiness itself was a form of worship. If law was born from reason, then love was born from the awakening of the heart. The Sumerians were the first to write love poetry. On fragile tablets, they etched verses of tenderness and longing. My beloved is a garden in the wind, where I walk and quietly bloom. One of the earliest poems ever recorded, the love songs of Inanna and Dumuzi, tells of the goddess Inanna's union with the shepherd Dumuzi. It is both a divine romance and a metaphor for fertility, death, and rebirth. When Inanna descends to the underworld, the world withers. When she rises again, the land blossoms. Through love, they explained the very rhythm of existence. Love, for them, was not weakness. It was the force that held the cosmos together. Everywhere in Sumerian cities, art bloomed. From temple reliefs showing the god Enki releasing rivers of wisdom, to small clay statues of worshippers with wide, unblinking eyes, their faces serene, their hands folded in eternal reverence. These were not idols of fear. They were portraits of devotion. The artists of Sumer carved not to impress the eye, but to express the soul. Each line, each curve, was a dialogue between human and divine. In their art, emotion became tangible. The Sumerians were the first poets of humanity, and among them, one name shines above all: Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon the Great, high priestess of the moon god Nanna. She is the earliest known author in human history. In her hymns to Inanna, she explored the balance of power and compassion, of love and reason. She wrote, "You lifted me like the sun from darkness. You taught me that power is not in the hand, but in the heart that knows love." Her words, written 4,000 years ago, still echo with a clarity that feels modern. They are not prayers. They are self-awareness in verse. In temples and homes, artists carved statues of people praying, their bodies still, their eyes enormous and round. To modern eyes, they may look strange, but to the Sumerians, the wide eyes meant awakening. They believed the eyes were the doorway of the soul, the point where man meets God. So they made their statues with eternal eyes, forever open to wonder. The Sumerians had no word for art. They used the word mi, meaning divine order. To them, beauty was not appearance. It was harmony, a reflection of the balance between man, nature, and heaven. A well-built wall, a fair judgment, a truthful song, all were equally beautiful. And in that harmony, they found their faith. They were the first to see that aesthetics is a form of intelligence. Through music, poetry, and art, the Sumerians discovered something beyond survival: self-awareness. They did not simply live, they felt that they were alive. They turned emotion into creation, and creation into meaning. That is when they truly became human. From them, the world learned that knowledge alone is not enough. We must also learn to feel. Their songs became the foundation of music. Their poems, the root of literature. Their art, the mirror of the human soul. We are not born only to understand, they seem to say, but to feel. And in every note, every word, every carving of clay, the heart of Sumer still sings. They were the first to teach us that before we can conquer the world, we must first listen to the song within our own hearts. In the land between two rivers, life for the Sumerians began at sunrise and ended with starlight. At dawn, the oxen plowed the wet soil. At noon, the smell of baked barley bread drifted through narrow streets. At dusk, Families sat before their clay brick homes, telling stories while the wind whispered through the reeds. There were no palaces of marble or golden tombs. Yet in those ordinary days, the Sumerians built something greater than monuments. They built civilization itself. The Sumerians built their houses from sun-dried mud bricks, square and simple, but clever in design. With thick walls to block the heat, flat roofs to sleep under the stars, and courtyards that filled with evening breeze. Inside were rooms for family, a small kitchen with an open hearth, and a tiny shrine with a lamp that never went out. Symbol of life, light, and continuity. For them, the home was not just shelter. It was a small temple of the gods, where divine order met human love. In Sumer, women held a place of dignity unseen in most ancient worlds. They could own property, run businesses, appear in court, and divorce their husbands. In temple records, female merchants signed contracts in their own names. Some women were priests, scribes, musicians, even physicians. The Sumerians saw womanhood as sacred, the living symbol of fertility, creativity, and compassion. Their most powerful deity was not a male warrior, but Inanna, goddess of love, wisdom, and war. She embodied the truth that creation itself flows from the feminine. Marriage in Sumer was both practical and spiritual, a union not only of people but of families and destinies. They saw love as a gift from the gods, and marriage as the bridge between heaven and earth. Weddings were joyous celebrations filled with music, beer, and honey cakes. Clay tablets preserve the oldest known wedding song in the world, a bride's hymn to her groom. My beloved, my heart is a fertile field. Plow it with your gaze, and I shall bloom. It was both poetry and prayer, a symbol of love as creation, and creation as divine love. Men were protectors and providers. Women were nurturers, teachers, and the guardians of the household spirit. Children learned their first lessons not in temples, but at their mother's knees, about kindness, fairness, and the names of the stars. One clay tablet from an ancient Aduba school preserves the voice of a boy writing to his mother. I study well. I write my signs neatly, so one day you may call me a man who knows how to write. It is, perhaps, the first letter from a son to his mother ever written. The Sumerian world was a vast system of cooperation. Every person had a role, every task a purpose. Farmers grew barley, dates, and onions, maintaining the great irrigation canals that fed the land. Craftsmen shaped pottery, forged copper, wove cloth, and brewed beer. Merchants traded goods with faraway lands, timber from Lebanon, tin from Iran, gold from Egypt. Scribes and priests recorded every measure and transaction, keeping knowledge alive through generations. They even measured work by hours. The Sumerians invented the first concept of a working day. Their cities were not chaotic markets of survival, but organized symphonies of purpose. The Sumerians loved life's simple pleasures. Their diet was rich and communal. Barley bread, lamb, fish, dates, garlic, onions, and olive oil. Their favorite drink was beer, brewed thick and sweet, sipped through long reeds from shared jars. Meals were not just nourishment. They were rituals of gratitude. Before eating, families offered a small portion to the household gods, thanking Enki for water and Ninhursag for grain. Even their laughter was a form of prayer. Both men and women wore long woolen robes or linen garments, their fringes carefully pleated to show status. Women styled their hair in elegant braids, painted their eyes with black kohl, and adorned themselves with jewelry of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. To the Sumerians, beauty was not vanity. It was a way of honoring the gods who gave life its form. When you care for your body, they believed, you honor the gift of creation. Children played games still familiar today: ball games, toy animals, dice, and board games. The Sumerians even created the world's oldest board game, the royal game of Ur. Its polished tiles of shell and lapis told of chance and fate, a reflection of how the Sumerians saw life itself, part strategy, part luck, and always in the hands of destiny. Adults, too, enjoyed music, dancing, and storytelling. Their evenings were filled with laughter, reminding us that joy has always been part of being human. Of course, Sumer was not paradise. There were slaves, usually war captives, and the poor sometimes worked under heavy taxes. Inequality existed, and old age could be lonely. But unlike other ancient empires, the Sumerians recorded even their flaws. They wrote about injustice and despair because they understood that truth, even painful truth, was the foundation of wisdom. If a Sumerian from 5,000 years ago could walk among us today, he would not be lost. He would see families laughing at the dinner table, mothers teaching their children, music in the streets, and he would smile. "You are still us," he might say. "Only your houses are taller." The greatness of Sumer did not come from kings or conquests, but from ordinary hands. The farmer, the mother, the craftsman, the student. It was their daily work, their quiet love, that built the foundation of civilization. The secret of Sumer was never in its bricks or temples, but in its people, who believed that ordinary life could be sacred. Every civilization has its heroes, but the Sumerians were the first to write their heroes into eternity. Their stories were not about gods alone, but about men who dared to question the gods. Men who feared, loved, failed, and learned. In the fragile lines of clay tablets, we meet the oldest hero in recorded history. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who set out to conquer death itself. And through his journey, humanity spoke for the first time, not as worshippers, but as thinkers seeking meaning. Around 2700 BCE, in the city of Uruk, Gilgamesh ruled with unmatched strength and pride. He was 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a god among men, but a man in his loneliness. The people prayed for relief, so the gods created Enkidu, a wild man of the steppe, a creature of nature meant to humble the king. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu met, they fought like thunder and storm. But instead of killing one another, they became brothers, bound by respect and love. Together, they faced monsters and gods, the terrifying Humbaba of the cedar forest, and the bull of heaven sent by the furious goddess Inanna. But after their triumphs came tragedy. For defying the divine, Enkidu was condemned to die. When his friend's body turned cold, Gilgamesh's heart broke. And for the first time in history, a man, though a king, though part god, wept for the fragility of life. Haunted by the shadow of death, Gilgamesh abandoned his throne and wandered the world. He sought the one man who had escaped mortality, Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of a great flood. Utnapishtim told him the story. The gods, angered by human noise and corruption, sent a flood to wipe out all life. But the god Enki whispered to Utnapishtim in a dream, instructing him to build a great boat. He saved his family, his animals, and the seed of every art and science. When the waters finally receded, he released a dove. The bird returned with a branch of olive, and the world began anew. When the gods swore never again to destroy mankind, Utnapishtim said, they gave man the gift of memory instead of immortality. Gilgamesh begged for the secret of eternal life, but Utnapishtim only smiled. You have crossed oceans and mountains, he said, but you cannot cross your own nature. At last, Gilgamesh understood. Immortality was not in flesh. It was in legacy. He returned to Uruk, rebuilt its mighty walls, and wrote his story in clay, ensuring that he would live forever in memory. The Sumerian flood story predates the Bible's Noah by more than 1,000 years. Yet the parallels are unmistakable. A divine warning, a great ark, a dove, a promise of rebirth. Perhaps the flood was real, a catastrophic deluge that swept through Mesopotamia. But to the Sumerians, it was more than history. It was a lesson that civilization itself must sometimes be washed clean so that humanity can begin again. The flood was not an ending. It was a second creation. Enkidu's story is a tragedy wrapped in wisdom. He was born free, untamed, living among animals. Then he met a woman, and through her love, he discovered consciousness. He lost his innocence, but gained knowledge. He could never return to the wild. The Sumerians were the first to grasp this paradox, that knowledge is both a gift and a curse. It is the same story told later as Adam and Eve in Eden. But for the Sumerians, it was not a sin. It was the price of becoming human. In countless other myths, the Sumerians explored every aspect of being alive. Etana, who rode on an eagle's back to seek the plant of birth, symbolizing hope and renewal. Adapa, the wise man who refused the food of immortality, choosing knowledge over eternal life. Lugalbanda, the warrior king who learned that true strength lies not in the sword, but in kindness. Each tale was not just fantasy. It was a study of the human condition. They were the first to turn myth into psychology. Before Sumer, myths were about gods commanding humans. After Sumer, myths were about humans confronting gods. The Sumerians had transformed myth from divine decree into a mirror of human courage and doubt. Their stories were not meant to teach obedience, but to show that wisdom begins with questioning. Through them, humanity took the first step toward philosophy, literature, and self-awareness. The Sumerian heroes were not flawless warriors. They were dreamers, doubters, seekers. They taught us that to be human is to struggle against limits and to find meaning within them. From their stories, the world learned that no one can escape death, but through creation, memory, and love, we become eternal. And knowledge is the truest form of victory. At the end of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero returns to his city and stands upon its walls. He looks down at the river glinting in the sun and speaks softly. Look upon these walls. Each brick bears a name. When I am gone, they will remain. And when they are gone, my name will remain. It was the first time in history that a man understood. To be remembered is to defeat death. And in that moment, Gilgamesh became more than a king. He became the voice of humanity. The Sumerians were the first to ask, "Who am I among the stars?" And for the first time, they answered in their own words. By 2300 BCE, after more than 1,000 years of brilliance, Sumer, the land of the first thinkers, builders, and dreamers, began to tremble beneath the weight of time. From the northern plains came a new people, the Akkadians, led by a conqueror named Sargon the Great. With iron discipline and ambition, Sargon swept across Mesopotamia, uniting all the city-states of Sumer under a single banner, the world's first empire. The Age of Kings had begun, and the age of Sumer as an independent world was ending. Sargon did not destroy the Sumerians. He learned from them. He adopted their cuneiform writing, their laws, their bureaucracy, their gods. But under the rule of Akkad, the Sumerian language slowly faded from everyday speech. Their culture became the foundation, but no longer the voice of the land. For the first time, Sumerian priests and scribes became keepers of a legacy, not creators of it. The genius of Sumer began to live through others. Around 2150 BCE, the Akkadian Empire collapsed under drought, rebellion, and invasion. From the Zagros Mountains descended the Gutians, a fierce nomadic people who cared nothing for temples or laws. They ravaged the land, and the lights of the great Sumerian cities flickered out. A tablet from that dark time reads, "There was no king in the land. No one taught us to pray. The wind and flood consumed our fields. It was the first written record of despair, the moment when humanity realized that even civilization could die. But Sumer refused to vanish. From the ruins rose a new ruler, Ur-nammu, who founded the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BCE. He rebuilt temples, restored writing, and composed the first code of law. His son, Shulgi, carried the torch further, creating schools, libraries, and trade routes that stretched across the known world. Under them, Sumer bloomed one last time. The Ziggurat of Ur, still standing today, was their final masterpiece, a mountain of faith and reason carved from mud and sun. Ur-nammu called himself the keeper of Sumer's final breath, and indeed he was. By 2004 BCE, internal strife and invasions from the east brought ruin once more. The Elamites stormed the land, burned Ur, looted temples, and scattered the people. This time Sumer would not rise again. But its fall was not a death. It was a transformation. Out of its ashes rose Babylon, a city that inherited the spirit of Sumer. The Babylonians took Sumerian gods, Sumerian mathematics, Sumerian laws, and Sumerian writing, and carried them into the next age. When King Hammurabi carved his code of laws into stone 400 years later, he was merely continuing the dream of ur-nammu. By 1800 BCE, the Sumerian language was no longer spoken. But the priests and scholars of Babylon still studied it in their schools, as later generations would study Latin. They called it the language of the gods. For more than 1,000 years after Sumer's fall, scribes continued to copy Sumerian texts, hymns, and proverbs, ensuring that the thoughts of those first minds would never vanish. The people disappeared, but their words lived on. The Sumerians left no marble palaces, no golden monuments. What they left was far greater. Ideas. From them, the world inherited the concept of law stronger than violence, knowledge stronger than superstition, writing stronger than death. They proved that the truest power of humanity is not conquest, but understanding. They were the first to believe that intelligence is sacred. 4,000 years later, in the 19th century, archaeologists digging in the deserts of Iraq unearthed strange clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped signs. At first, no one could read them. But after decades of work, scholars finally unlocked the code of cuneiform, and a lost world emerged from the dust. For the first time, modern humans heard the voices of their ancestors. We wrote of love, of justice, of death and dreams. We are not myths. We are you. The Sumerians had spoken again. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero once asked, "How can a man live forever?" The Sumerians answered across millennia, "Should write, build, love, and your name will outlive your flesh." And they were right. Their clay survived flood and fire. Their thoughts crossed ages and empires. Their wisdom still shapes how we measure time, justice, and truth. They achieved the immortality they sought, not through gods, but through memory. When the sun sets over the ruins of Ur, the wind hums softly through the hollow bricks. Each grain of dust once bore the imprint of a hand, a word, a thought. If you listen closely, you might hear it still. And we were the first to kindle the flame. The fire has faded, but the light has never gone out. Sumer never truly died. It simply became part of us, living on in every word, every number, every question that begins with why. A single question changed the course of history. Why? The Sumerians were the first to ask it. Why does it rain? Why do the stars move? Why must we die? Why must the world be just? Every time they asked, they did not merely seek answers. They invented the act of asking. For the first time, humanity stopped surviving and started thinking. They had no marble, no iron, no gold, only mud, reeds, and fire. Yet from these humble materials, they built everything we now call civilization. writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, education, ethics, and the very idea of progress. They were the first to turn the chaos of nature into the order of reason. If civilization is a mirror, the Sumerians were the ones who first polished the glass. When we read their words today, we do not find strangers from a distant past. We find ourselves. They loved, feared, hoped, doubted, and dreamed as we do. When Gilgamesh grieved for Enkidu, it was the first recorded tear of mankind. When Enheduanna wrote of love and faith, it was the first whisper of the human soul. Their tools were primitive, their hearts were modern. They remind us that time changes everything, except what it means to be human. The Sumerians built no wonders of stone. They built something far more enduring: memory. They pressed their thoughts into wet clay, believing that words could outlast flesh. And they were right. Thousands of years later, their tablets still speak. The fragile clay survived flood, fire, and empire, while the bodies of their kings turned to dust. He who writes lives twice. They wrote that. And in writing, they lived again. Every moment of modern life is an echo of Sumer. Every minute you count, 60 seconds, is theirs. Every circle you draw, 360 degrees, is theirs. Every law, every school, every written word, all born from their hands of clay. We live in a world they imagined. We speak with the symbols they invented. We think with the structures they built. Civilization itself is the shadow they cast across time. Sumer fell, and for 4 millennia its cities slept beneath the sand. Then, one by one, the spades of archaeologists unearthed their ruins. Tablets emerged, dry and cracked, and with them, a voice. When scholars deciphered cuneiform, they realized what they were reading: the first human thoughts ever written. The Sumerians spoke to us across 5,000 years. We are not myth. We are the beginning of you. And humanity, for the first time, heard its own origin story told by human hands. If the Sumerians could look upon the world today, the towers higher than ziggurats, the satellites charting the stars they once counted by eye, the machines that write in light instead of clay, they would smile, because they would recognize themselves in us. We are the continuation of their dream. A dream that reason could illuminate darkness, that curiosity could rival the gods, that knowledge could make us infinite. They were the first to light the fire. We are the ones still tending it. Stand among the ruins of Ur at sunset, and the wind carries a soft murmur through the ancient walls. It is not the voice of gods. It is the echo of human thought, the first whisper of consciousness. Listen closely, and you can almost hear them say, "Remember us." We were the first to wonder, the first to understand, the first to become. That is the sound of eternity remembering itself. Empires fall, languages fade, but ideas never die. The Sumerians proved that immortality is not a gift from heaven. It is the triumph of the mind over oblivion. When we ask, we live. When we remember, the past lives through us. When we understand, we become eternal. That is their true legacy. The conviction that knowledge, not faith, makes humankind divine. 5,000 years ago, a Sumerian pressed a reed into clay, leaving a mark that would outlast his city, his people, his gods. That mark was the first heartbeat of civilization, Sumer, the cradle of thought, the dawn of intelligence, the moment humanity found its reflection in the stars. They vanished as a people, but their echo will never fade, because that echo is us.